Hello, amazing parents and caretakers, and welcome to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. I'm your family empowerment coach, Celia Kibler. I'm a mom of a blended family of 5 kids. I'm a grandma of 9 kids, an author, a teacher, a speaker, and a consultant with over 40 years of training and real-life parenting experience. I'm here to offer you practical, doable tips, strategies, and techniques that will pump up your parenting skills and create peace, love, and laughter throughout your family. In addition, I'll be interviewing some great humans that are on a mission to make your life a better, happier, and healthier life. So let's not waste any time and get started with the next episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. We are talking about something extremely important that parents don't know enough about, don't want to know enough about, and don't even think that they need to worry about or concern themselves about. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about human trafficking. It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month this month in January, and I have an absolute expert here that is going to teach us everything about it. Erin Williamson is an expert in child sexual abuse, human trafficking, and all forms of safety for children. She is the Chief Programs and Strategy Officer at Love 146, an international anti-trafficking organization. And she is here to not only teach you, but to teach me. I am the founder of the Day of Calm Foundation, and we work hard on taking care of the anger, the violence, the rage that really impacts our children on a daily basis by the minute. I mean, it's not even like once a day, it's like a gazillion times a day. And if we're not proactive on making people believe that children are not owned, they're not just there for play, if we don't help that, we're never going to take care of all this violence and aggression against kids. And human trafficking is everywhere. And you may not think it's where you live, but I'm here to tell you. And not only me, but Erin, the expert, is here to also tell you. So this is where our discussion begins. Erin, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful for your contribution to this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me and for kind of being part of raising the awareness about this important issue, because I do think a lot of people are unaware of it and unaware of how close it can be and how under the surface this really is within our communities.
I totally agree. And like we were talking before we started recording, parents come at it at so many different views. Oh, it's not happening here. Oh, it is happening here. My child can't do anything and should be afraid of everyone. Oh, well, what if it does happen? I don't really have a clue what to do. I don't even know how to talk about it. So let's address all those angles. But first, if you would, tell our listeners how they can reach you, number one. Number two, how did you get so deeply involved in all of this?
Sure. No, so I work for an organization called Love 146, and our website is LOVE146.org. And we work both internationally and here in the United States. I know a lot of people don't think it happens here, but we do work here. I have myself worked both internationally and here in the United States. I did start this work overseas, working with street children in Kenya. I worked with street children in Mexico. And then I really started looking at what we call child sex tourism, people taking trips with the explicit purpose of engaging in sexual relations with a child, somehow believing it's culturally appropriate or okay to do that behavior overseas. And then I just really started focusing in on what was happening in my own neighborhood, in my own backyard, and here in the United States. I also had my own children, and so started thinking about the issue very differently when I had my own children and really could equate what I was doing professionally with seeing my own children grow up, and how do I teach and raise them knowing the realities of what I know.
And I would think it's even more of a challenge for you than me. I know the horror that goes on for children. I know the what's that word? Atrocity? That's not the word.
Atrocities.
Atrocities. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you. The atrocities of what goes on. I knew that wasn't quite right.
right.
And you know, but you have seen it, lived it, and you have to take care of your children and raise them in a compassionate, kind, respectful way without making them afraid of all the little inner secrets that you know. So
Yep.
let's just start there real quick. And how do you do that? How Because I think this will be something that once people finish listening to this podcast, that they're going to have the same concern. How do you raise a child that isn't afraid of the whole world and who knows who and that whole stranger danger thing, which I think we've talked about before, which I don't like, um, because it just makes kids afraid of everyone. How do you avoid that knowing what you know?
No, it's a great question. And for context, my husband is a pediatric neuro-oncologist. So he deals with children who have brain cancer, right? So as our children have grown up, he always thinks our child is going, or our children are going to get some horrific illness or disease, right? And I come with oh my gosh, someone's going to take advantage of them. So both of us have kind of had to learn how to mitigate our knowledge and really think about, okay, how do we want to raise our children and what do we want them to experience? And I think that where we start from is we want them to live life, right? And that sounds really basic, but actually living life and not being afraid of life is, I think, a gift that parents can help instill in their children, right? And I think that that takes some intentionality, and especially when you have fear and know the reality of how severe, exploitation could be or a severe illness could be. But we really try to not live in the what ifs. We obviously take precautions, but then we also have to kind of just trust that if something will happen, we will do our best to deal with it. But then in reality, we don't have the power or control to prevent everything that could potentially happen to our children. And I think some of it is recognizing you can kind of set everything up, and then at some point you have to recognize that your ability to control life is limited, that bad things happen to good people, that people can do everything right and still have an atrocity happen to them in their real life. It doesn't mean that they didn't plan or they didn't mitigate things. It's just that is how life is. And so it is important to think, in the event something horrific happens, what would you do? How would you think about that? Because the reality is that we can do everything to protect ourselves, and we still can't control it. And at least for my husband and me, it was really important that our children not grow up to think the world is a scary place, or to think that their bodies are a scary place, right, in terms of their health. And so it was really important for us to kind of expose them to the natural things of sleepovers and eating junk food and having those days. I mean, they do everything within reason, but those were important, things as you grow up and live life as a child.
I so agree, and I'm glad you brought up the concept of control, because I talk about that with my clients all the time. And when I do, videos and things like that, is that the only thing we can control is us and
Absolutely.
how we react, how we respond, how we teach our children to also react, respond, live, find joy, be kind, all of those things. That is under our control. What is then not under our control is how your child handles all that, because it's from their perspective that they're learning. And once we understand that our control is our own body, our own mind, our own behavior, and no one else, not even the person standing next to you, can you control. Once you get that realization, then you actually start taking responsibility for yourself, and you stop the blaming and the excuses, and you learn more. If you're having a challenge with something, something's not going right, or something like this, you're like, I don't really even know how to approach it. Learn how. Listen to podcasts like this. Reach out to Erin. Reach out to me. Reach out to someone who has the knowledge of how to advise you. And a lot of it gets down to, I told you before, I'm not a big fan of stranger danger because it just creates fearful children and humans. And you know, down to the point of be mindful of your body. Recognize what the sensations are within when you feel like you're not safe. And start there, because that is helping your child learn about those body cues.
Yeah. And I think when you say learn, that's so important. Part of the reason stranger danger isn't helpful is also it's just not true, right? When you look at the statistics of kidnapping, you can go and you can look at, what the National Center for Missing and Exploited says and how many kids, but the large majority of that is actually parents or family members,
Right.
right?
People they know.
Exactly. Like not just 51, but like the large majority of it
Right.
percentage
Yeah,
is family
I
members.
think it's actually like I want to say it's like 85%,
Right. And so when
somewhere
you
large, leaving a
and
very small percentage for strangers.
exactly, exactly. And even within that, whatever's left, they're not all strangers, right? Some of them are people that were in their lives that had trusting relationships and then groomed and recruited them, but not kind of what we have typically thought of when we've thought of like you're standing on a bus corner and a van or a truck drives by or something. And so, part of it is also learning the facts. So you're actually teaching your kid the correct thing. Because if you're only teaching them about stranger danger, then they in turn might think, oh, well, then if I know them, they're safe.
Right.
Right.
That's what the opposite means.
Exactly. And so in reality, that is what predators take advantage of, right? They take advantage of our narratives, which are stranger danger, and they make themselves have a role with the kids so that they can be safe people within these children's lives because they've only been taught stranger danger.
Right.
I think that that's so true. The other thing that we've done is if you go to our website, we have on the top, you can click, it's for parent resources, and you can sign up for a series of emails. And those are really practical tips about how to have these conversations with kids, right? I think a lot of times parents want to have these conversations, but they just don't know where to start or how to do it. And we realized, like you were saying, that we actually just had to, instead of just constantly saying, talk to your kids about trafficking, it's like, oh, well, most people actually don't know how to do that. Or how to do it in a way that's not terrifying, right, for children. And so what we did was we created this kind of series about how do you talk to your kid about the internet? How do you talk to them about giving them a phone, about apps? What do you do when your kid makes a mistake? Because again, kids are going to naturally make mistakes and do things. And so that's also another way that people can educate themselves. But I think that learning facts from reputable sources, and I really emphasize the reputable sources, can also calm our own anxieties about as a parent, right? It's somehow better to know, oh, in general, the large majority of kidnappings, I actually don't need to worry about because I am not worried about my partner or my family member kidnapping them. And so I can calm myself and I can be relaxed about it. And I can talk to them about what do you do, right? If you have that gut feeling, who do you reach out to? You can always come and talk to me about things. And I can focus on on those messages, as opposed to being worried that somehow some stranger's going to, pull up next to my child when they're waiting for the bus.
That's such good advice, and I love that you have that on your website. So again, guys, go to love146.org and find that parent resource tab, which will, give you those emails on how to talk to a child. Brilliant, brilliant. And, it is very important that you learn, because if you're getting your information from the news right now, if you watch the news, you're going to think kids are being kidnapped, trafficked, that's raped, killed, mugged, like list everything that could happen to a human. It's all over the news. It's all the news is about. I often wonder, why is the good news portion at the end of the news, and why is not the not so good news portion at the end of the news? Wouldn't the news be more valuable if we talked about all the good that's happening? And there is a lot of good happening. I will always believe that the majority of humans are good people, and that there is a minority of people that are not so great. So let's talk about a little bit, without overwhelming everybody and shocking everyone, since it is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. What is it that parents, listeners, other who is not a parent, caretakers, anybody needs to know about what is going on in the world?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, and the reality is that there's also a lot of media about trafficking, right? And more recently, there's actually been some really high profile stories. For example, Sean, some people know as P. Diddy Combs, was recently arrested for trafficking, as were the CEOs of Abercrombie and Fitch, as were two kind of major real estate agents. And that's nothing to say of what we've heard and seen happen in the past. And if we think that kids aren't coming across these stories, they are. And I'll just give you an example. My 12-year-old has group chats. And all of a sudden, we noticed that in one of his group chats, the name of the group chat was changed to a Diddy party, right? Yeah. And that's my child in this group chat. And that prompted a really serious conversation between us. Now, I've had lots of conversations with him about trafficking and about my work over the years, but what does a Diddy party mean to you? What do you think that person is saying when they write a Diddy party? Do you think that person realizes that young girls, young boys, women were raped at these parties? Is that person? And how do you respond as a member of that group? Do you rename the chat? Do you say something publicly, right? These are hard lessons for kids, especially in group context. But if we think that kids are not coming across these news stories, we're fooling
You're wrong.
ourselves. And unless we're talking to them about it, we don't know what messages they're taking from the news stories that they're reading, right? They could be taking the message that this is cool, this is glamorous, this is what life should be about. We should throw our own Diddy parties at 12 years of age, and that would be awesome. And again, I think that I was able to leverage previous conversations I had had with my child in talking to him about this, right? It wasn't coming out of nowhere. It was, okay, let's talk about what happens at a Diddy party. What do you think happens? How do you want to handle this? And so, I think when parents think about what do they need to talk about with their children, again, these stories are now out there, right? And in some ways, that can also be a benefit. Parents can use that to initiate a conversation,
Right,
right? Leverage what's out there to say, have you seen this? Are you aware that what are your thoughts? What's your understanding of what's happening?
right. What are your friends saying about it? Because
Exactly.
they're saying stuff about it.
They're for sure talking about it. I mean, and I'm telling you, we live in a very, you know, a very well resourced community with great schools, and parents are very involved, and my child has a friend group that's naming themselves Diddy Party. This is happening everywhere. If you think it's not happening in your community, you're just wrong. And one of the conversations that we have and that we have had as our kids have gotten older is, if you're old enough to have a phone, or if you're old enough to ask, then you're old enough to have this conversation. Because if you're not old enough to have this conversation, then I'm certainly not going to give you a phone with free access to the
The
internet and all of
world.
these other things,
Right.
right? And so some of it is also testing out their maturity, right? And helping them
Exactly.
practice having awkward conversations. Because if something happens to them, it's going to be an awkward conversation when they bring it to you.
As parents, we all have those moments. The pressure builds up, the noise gets too much, and before we know it, we're raising our voices higher than we ever intended. But what if there was a better way? Introducing 21 Days to Stop Yelling at Your Kids, a revolutionary program designed to help you communicate with your children without yelling. Imagine a home filled with understanding and respect, where your words have impact without the need to raise your voice. Created through my over 40 years of experience, this course offers you practical, easy to implement strategies that work in real life. You'll learn through interactive lessons, engaging exercises, and a supportive community. No judgments, just guidance. Because being a parent doesn't have to mean you're perfect. It's about growing, and it's about becoming intentional. In just 21 days, life will be calmer and more harmonious. What if you don't get the course? Where will you be in 21 days? Still feeling like a bad parent? I encourage you to join the millions of parents that I have helped who have found a new path to communication and connection. Visit quityelling.com to enroll in the 21 Days to Stop Yelling course today. And for our podcast listeners, use the code PODCAST for a 60% discount. Quityelling.com, because love speaks so much louder than yelling. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you on the other side. Right. And you want them to feel safe to bring it to you. I had a client whose daughter had just gotten a phone, had started some of these chat groups, and wound up lending her phone, was out with a friend, lent her phone to her friend, who made these comments on this chat group about a kid. And it was basically like a cyberbullying thing, but it was coming from this client's daughter, even though she didn't write it. And she didn't think, in giving this friend the phone, that anything, and she wound up, this like went to the school, and they have to be aware, they have to be smart, they have to watch out for giving their phones to even buddies, and not allow others to enter into conversations you don't want to be a part of through your phone or in any other way. And if you disagree, it's important to encourage your child to be the one that speaks up. Don't just stand by idly and watch it all go down. It is important to give them that empowerment and really ask them, what would you do in this situation? This happened. I heard on a podcast that this happened to, the woman's child, and it was renamed, this group was renamed this. I heard that this happened to this woman's child. A friend took her phone and started cyberbullying someone else in the name of that child because the messages were coming across from that phone. And these are great examples to ask your child, because they may not think of it. And if, like you say, if they're old enough to have the phone, they're old enough to have access to the world, you have got to realize they're old enough to know a better system, to know better when things come up, and to stand up for others.
Yeah. Yeah. And to stand up for themselves, right? They may also end up
Yes,
in a
and themselves,
situation
absolutely.
that they're not sure how to mitigate. They're not sure how to handle. It can be, I think sometimes we hand over these devices or we hand over this freedom, and you should, as your children get older, they should have more access to the world and freedom, and they should be able to have friends and friendships, and that you don't know every single thing that happens in their life again as they get older. But they don't have the skill sets inherently, right? You're going to have to help them work through, what does it happen when you have a seizure, a break in a relationship and a friendship? How do you mitigate that? How do you make that up? What happens when, a partner doesn't treat you well, right? And do you stay in that relationship? Do you think of getting out of that relationship? What is a healthy relationship? It's interesting because a lot of times those of us who think that we're demonstrating a healthy relationship to our children think, well, we don't have to then talk about unhealthy relationships. But the reality is that if we don't talk about unhealthy relationships, our children might not know how to recognize them,
Right.
right? So they have a different set of risk factors than kids that are growing up in households with unhealthy relationship, right? Those kids might think, oh, well, this is normal. This is how relationships are. Our kids might not think it's normal, but they also might not be able to recognize what are the red flags, because again, an unhealthy relationship doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while, right? You don't know on a first date or when somebody asks you out that this is going to become an unhealthy relationship. That happens over a period of time. And the sooner you recognize the kind of red flags, the easier it is for you to get out of that. But those of us who are trying to hold forth a healthy relationship also have our work to do to make sure that our kids have the knowledge that they need to kind of move forward in their relationships.
Absolutely. And not be blind to it. And realize that they meet a lot of people along the road of life. And it sexual conversations need to take place. Don't expect someone else to teach it, because you know who's going to teach it is their friends in Google.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what message do you want your child to know? What message do you want them watching porn, which, symbolizes sexual relationships in such a, for the most part, abusive way? Is this sex? If this is what they learn is sex because no one else teaches them, how do you expect them to behave differently? How do you expect them to know that they don't deserve a relationship like that? You have to talk about it. And so let's go in back into human trafficking, because do you have some tips that you can give these parents, these listeners, that they can advise their children in a positive way, but a constructive way, so that kids are aware but not scared?
So one of the things that I think is really helpful, and this is more also just self-awareness as well, right? Is that a lot of times people want to take advantage of our vulnerabilities, right? And many of us have factors that make us very resilient as well. So in our prevention education program, which is a 5 module long thing, but we actually have an exercise where we work with kids to help them identify what are some of your vulnerabilities that someone could take advantage of, right? And it can be everything from sometimes we don't have enough food in the house, to um, you know, I really always want to be perfect, right? I want to get straight A's. That's actually a vulnerability. You might not think about it, but we have seen traffickers use that against children so that they don't tell their parents. So I'll give you a quick example. They'll get an explicit photo of a child, and then they'll say, what would your family and community think if I shared this with them? If they knew the real you wasn't the perfect A student that they all think that you are, right? So there are different vulnerabilities, and helping kids see what are some vulnerabilities, but are what are the things that make you resilient, right? So maybe you really struggle with your perfectionism, right? But your awareness of that is part of what helps make you resilient, right? Maybe you struggle to have food in your house all the time, but there's a teacher you know you can go to when things get really bad, and they'll always give you and some extra granola bars to take home over the weekend, right? And recognizing kind of who are the people you can go to, or what are the things that make you resilient against things, and also your vulnerabilities, just makes you more self-aware and makes it so predators, including traffickers, are less likely to take advantage of those things without you being aware of them.
Yes, and I think that also brings us to the topic of what are your child's strengths? As
Exactly.
you're raising your child, recognize what they're great at, right? People are like, oh, I'm always negotiating with my child. Well, that could be a very good thing in a
Absolutely.
situation, and they might grow up to be an attorney, but that could be a very good tool if they're always negotiating, they're standing up for themselves. Like, oh, I'm not going to go there. I don't even like that kind of thing. I'm not going to, and they're because a person who is trying to find a vulnerable kid is going to be like, okay, this one's way too much trouble. So be grateful for that, parents. Don't just keep, oh, I wish my kids would go along with everything I say. Oh, look at this child. The child does everything that their parent says. Is that really a good thing? It's actually not a great thing that they are the people pleaser. They are, oh, I grew up that way. I grew up being the people pleaser. I'm like the ultimate like calm guru. I created a whole day for everybody to be calm. But is that a good thing? Is it difficult to raise a child who is a little more strong-willed? Yes. But when you know what you're doing and you have a system in place at home, you also recognize that that's not a bad quality for a kid, teen, adult to have.
And point that out to them, right? They might not recognize that, but you can say, you know what? You are like a great negotiator, right? I know sometimes it drives me nuts, and I know sometimes we fight about it, but have you ever like reframed and realized what you're doing is negotiating? And you're really, really good at it, right? This is
Right.
something for you to be aware of. I remember, getting into gaming, obviously for me that was a challenge. My son, when he started doing gaming, I had a lot of reservations, I had a lot of concerns, and I read this article and it really stuck with me. It said, gaming can teach a lot of amazing skills.
Yes, I
For
can.
example, it can teach you to not give up, right? Every time you die in a game, you have another chance to try it again. And kids will sit there for hours redoing the exact same game, learning how do you
Learning from their
go
mistakes.
exactly. And one of the things that you can do as parents is help show them how those skills can also be applicable outside of the gaming world. So, when they're really struggling with homework, or they're really struggling to grasp a concept, say, well, look, you're actually have this skill set. You're really good. Let's talk about what you do when you're playing this game. You do it again and again. You don't expect yourself to get it right the first time. You never turn on a game and expect that you're going to win the first time you
The
sit
whole game, right.
down. Right. You're going to have to play it over and over and over and get better and better and better until you actually master it. The same thing is true about learning this math concept, right? No one expects you to know this stuff. You're going to have to practice it and try, and reframing things and helping them recognize, like, oh, I can do that. And I do this in other parts of my life. Again, that builds that resiliency in them, that helps them realize they do have skill sets, they do have strengths, and that is all part of prevention, right? When we think about preventing, sexual exploitation and human trafficking and really unhealthy relationships, all sorts of things can be prevented by really helping children to develop a positive image of themselves, to see where their strengths are, to see, and everybody has strengths, right?
Everybody.
Everybody has strengths. And so, if you're struggling to think about what are the strengths my kids have, take some time, right? Really think about that, because
Watch
it's
them. Sit
right.
there, hang out with them. They're sitting at the table, they're drawing, they're doing something. You can help out. Or you can just simply watch what they're interested in, even from the time they're little guys.
Yep. And then share that back with them. Share your observation and what you're noticing and what you're seeing, because that's just extremely, extremely important for them to see.
And don't be afraid to include them in your adult world.
Yes.
Everything does not have to be like you spend one-on-one time, it has to be a kid thing.
Right.
Include them in life as a grown-up. Include them in doing the laundry, include them in doing the dishes. You're going over, you're paying bills, include them.
Yep.
Show them what it's like as they get older and older, and the responsibilities they take in as being a part of this community, instead of them feeling like, okay, everyone's on their screen. Nobody's really is belonging in here. Belonging's huge. So all the things that you do together doesn't mean you just eat together, and as much as you can you should do that. Doesn't mean you like, okay, let's color together. It also means doing things together that you do to maintain your house, to clean your house, to help each other. All of that gives your child the knowledge that they are part of this bigger picture, surrounded by this love and inclusion. And that's really important to remember. You don't, I just did a reel about how, so often like a child will ask, we're natural born helpers, and a child will ask, can I help? And the parent will go, no, 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 go play. I've got this, like to fix dinner or whatever, because the
Yep.
parent doesn't want the mess or the delay or whatever it is. But what you're actually telling that child is your role is a player. You play with stuff. My role is to do everything that needs to be done around the house. Do we want that role? No, we don't want that role. We want them helping. So let them help, start teaching them skills and confidence and self awareness and all of the things that they need to know to be a stronger, more confident, valuing themselves type of person. And
When we do that, we have to also value that you're right, your kids aren't going to do it exactly how you would do it, right? And I learned
right.
this lesson myself when I had my child starting to do his own laundry, right? And I would open the drawers in his room afterwards and I would think, this is a mess, right? Like this is not at all how I would fold the clothes or put them away. But I also thought, but he got all the clothes into the drawers and I didn't have to do it. And he's taking ownership. And those are
Yes.
all, and it will take him a while before he cares that his pants are straight in a drawer. And he may never care, right? I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm not sure if my husband cares if his pants are straight in a drawer, but that's his choice,
Right.
right?
That's
And
your shtick, not his.
exactly. At the end of the day, you want your child to have the skill sets to be a highly functioning adult. And I will tell you, one of the comments that we often hear from kids who age out of the foster system is that that is what they feel they missed out on some of the most, right? Obviously, it's the love and the caretaking, but they will also hit this point after they've aged out where they realize there are just basic life skills that they didn't get to learn because they weren't living in a family where it was taught to them, right? They didn't get to follow their parent to the ATM and watch, how do you take money out of this machine? How does this whole thing work? How do I open a bank account? How do I cook pasta? How do I boil an egg? And we may take those small things for granted, but the reality is that you do have to teach your child, and as your child, even if at first they're like, ah, they will get into it with you, right? My daughter now at first was like, oh, I have to cook with with my parents. And now it's one of the things she enjoys
He
most,
loves.
right? And so, sometimes they don't come to it naturally, right? Who wants to do their own laundry? I don't want to do my own laundry, but they will come to appreciate and feel proud of themselves that they are taking on a level of responsibility in the house. And I think as parents, sometimes we have to let a little control go, right? It's not going to look exactly how we want, right? The dishes aren't going to be loaded exactly how we want or clean that way. And, but we're teaching them skills so that they can be successful adults. And that is something we want. We do want our
Yes.
children to
And they
launch
get
into the world.
better and better at it. And don't look at something and go, "Oh, well, you cleaned your room, but you missed that." So 99% of this room is clean, but you missed that direct criticism and you just told them they did a lousy job
Yeah.
when they did a great job. So what that they missed that? Walk over and pick it up yourself. What
Right.
is the big deal? Help them do things. Though you do it together, they learn. And little toddlers always want to help. They always want to be part of it and learn to help. So let them help.
And
And
you might not. Oh,
it makes for why how I always say we are raising adults, not children.
yeah.
So they're already kids. They already lack a lot of knowledge. It's our job to raise them into a confident, self-assured, all the things, high self-esteem, all of those things, high valued person, kind, compassionate, thoughtful, all the adjectives. And you have to be that person too. You have to be the role model. You can't just act however you want to act and expect your child to act different. They're following you, they're watching you, they're learning from you.
And you might not think of, again, how does this relate to trafficking? But what we find is that it's actually sometimes in those moments that kids will disclose something, right? If you sit down and you say, we're going to have a conversation, which sometimes you do need to just do that. You just need to have a conversation. But a lot of times the conversations come up while you're cooking together, while
Right,
you're one of the rules that we have in our household is there's no phones in the car for anybody, right? So if my kids are in the car, there's no phones, right? So oftentimes that we'll start having conversations. Sure, we'll listen to music and we'll sing, but we'll also talk. And so you have to kind of offer these spaces for your kids to bring things up to you, because if you're always sending them away or telling them to go entertain themselves or do, and again, that's a skill set, being able to entertain yourself and being
right,
able to,
right.
that's those are,
And
things
still
do
necessary.
that exactly. But you also need to create these pockets where there's almost like empty room and space that they are allowed to bring something into. That's how you're going to find out about what's happening in their life,
Right.
right?
Imagine if you're just sitting on the couch folding clothes
Hmm.
and there's kind of an awkward silence, but you're folding clothes and you're like, okay, here, you take this one, you take this one. It's very, automatic stuff. That may be the time your child feels comfortable to say, "Oh, do you know what happened in school today?"
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's there's so many benefits to that kind of situation, and, the connection benefit is huge, and kids need to know they're connected. They need to feel like they belong in your home, because if they don't, they will go find a place to belong, and I guarantee you it's not gonna be good. So anyway, Erin, this has been, we could probably go on for hours. And
For sure.
like I
For
say
sure.
often, I'm sure these people have something to do with their lives, but we should probably do a part two. But anyway, end of part one. And if you got value from this, and I would be shocked if you didn't, please reach out to Erin. Go download her helping with difficult conversations, love146.org. Check it out. If you want to reach out to me, I'm here. Let's help make the world a better place. Go to dayofcalm.org, two nonprofits that are helping kids live their best lives, and you being a key factor as part of it. So thank you for being here. I'm endlessly grateful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Erin. And for all of you, if this helped you, please share it out, because other parents are thinking the same thing and don't want to talk about it. Why? Because it's scary and it's worrisome. So share this out with your best friend, share this out with a family member, share it out. Give us comments below this podcast if you thought it was great and worthy, so other parents just scanning, what's out there, other caretakers, other grandparents can say, oh, this was valuable. So in the meantime, please take some advice out of this and do it. Do it tonight. You heard one tip, say, okay, that I'm gonna try that tonight. We're gonna sit down, we're gonna fold the laundry, and we're gonna see what conversation comes of it. Do something, take action, please. And as always, my friends, I wish you peace, love, tons of laughter. Don't forget to do stuff that's funny, because you know why? Laughter is the best medicine. So laugh more, have joke parties, make silly comments about each other, do silly things, bring out your inner child, have fun with your kids. And I'll see you here next time on the next episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. If this episode was helpful to you, please share it with a friend and leave us a review that will help others. Wonder why kids don't come with a manual? Well, wonder no more, because I wrote you one, and it's just won a wonderful Mom's Choice Award. Go to celiasbooks.com and buy your copy of Raising Happy Toddlers, as well as my children's books. I appreciate you being part of my mission to help 10 million parents stop yelling at their kids. Please be intentional and hug on those kids of yours. See you at the next episode.